Howdy folks, Max Volume here. The ABC Dragonfly radial engine was a 320 horsepower engine made in the First World War that a number of planes were designed for it, but were never used, like the Gloucester Nightjar and the Avro Spider. Also, I could only find 2 photographs of the Armstrong Whitworth Armadillo, so on with the video. The Armstrong Whitworth FK9 and FK10. Following the conventional FK8 two-seater, Frederick Koolhoven, possibly inspired by the excellence of the Sopwith triplane, designed a 2-seat fighter reconnaissance aircraft with quadruplane wings. By reverting to a mere 110 horsepower Clerget from the 160 horsepower Beardmore of the FK8, it seems that he hoped to achieve good performance and maneuverability by compact design. The quadruplane, designated FK9 and built as a private venture, was an ugly affair. As originally built, it had no dihedral, and the tapered outboard portions of the main planes had absurdly small ailerons, well inset from the wingtips. The wings were of narrow chord with close-set spars, and the plank-type interplane struts very similar to those of the Sopwith triplane were used. The angular fuselage terminated at a vertical rudder post that carried a triangular fin below the fuselage, and above the tailplane a tiny curved fairing that seemed to have been added more for the appearance's sake than for any aerodynamic purpose that it might have served. The tailplane could be adjusted in flight by the pilot. In its original form, the FK9 looked to be a terrifying vehicle, and there could be little doubt that its controllability must have been marginal, particularly laterally. It is therefore not surprising that the design was revised. New wings, with larger ailerons extending to the tips, were fitted. The outer portions had no taper, and the wings were rigged with some dihedral. An enlarged rudder was hinged to the original stern post. The original undercarriage was retained, but its track was increased appreciably, and a new engine cowling of greater camber was fitted. Despite the great distance separating pilot and observer, there was no provision for a dual control of any kind in the rear cockpit. The modified FK9 went to Central Flying School, where it was tested officially in November and December 1916. Its designed armament of 1 fixed Vickers gun and 1 free Lewis gun was not fitted. The pilot who tested the FK9 found it light to handle and easy to maneuver, but complained that the cockpit was so cramped that it was impossible to make full use of the controls. The report went on to say that the aircraft had to be trued up after every landing, owing to the inadequacy of the fuselage structure at the undercarriage attachment points. The aircraft's performance was poor. Speed at 10,000 feet was only 87.5 miles per hour, and the climb to that height took 23 minutes and 35 seconds. The service ceiling was 13,000 feet. Clearly, Koolhoven's quadruplane could not be considered as remotely comparable to the Bristol fighter that had been tested 2 months earlier. Yet, incredibly, a contract for 50 Armstrong Whitworth quadruplanes was given to Angus Sanderson and Company of Newcastle-on-Tyne. The contract was dated 30th December 1916. The production order must have been given in anticipation of greatly improved performance from a completely revised design that had the new type number FK10. The fuselage was more commodious than that of the FK9, and had fuller side fairings. A Vickers gun was mounted centrally on top of the forward fuselage, and there was a pillar mounting for a Lewis gun in the rear cockpit. Pilot and observer were again widely separated, yet there was still no dual control for use in emergency. The basic wing structure of the FK10 was similar to that of the FK9, but the wingtips were fully rounded. A completely new tail unit was fitted, its most radical change being the absence of a tailplane. Only the elevator was fitted, Maureen fashion. The engine was a 130 horsepower Clerget in a horseshoe-shaped cowling. A quadruplane of this configuration was tested at Martlesham Heath in March 1917, and, despite its more powerful engine, managed to return performance figures worse than those of the FK9. The test report acknowledged some of the modifications embodied in the FK10 to be improvements on the FK9, but recorded that the undercarriage was still structurally unsound, despite some rather sketchy local reinforcement of the fuselage. This FK10 wore no serial number, and Martlesham Heath was not apparently informed of its identity. It seemed that little use was made of this aircraft. Within a few months of its official tests, it was not known whether it belonged to the War Office or the Admiralty. The Sanderson contract was soon cancelled, and the serial numbers reallocated. Nevertheless, 5 Sanderson-built quadruplanes were completed, and under the original contract, with the revised date of 3rd August 1917. This must have been a bit of retrospective administrative tidying up, for the aircraft had been consigned to the technical department for use as targets by 21st July 1917. A further 3 FK-10s were ordered for the Royal Naval Air Service. But the Royal Naval Air Service cared no more for the quadruplane than did the Royal Flying Corps. The other 2 were written off at Manston on the 21st of August, 1917. The Armstrong Whitworth FM4 Armadillo. After Frederick Koolhoven left Armstrong Whitworth to join the BAT Company, his place as chief designer at Gosforth was taken by F. Murphy. At that time, no new original design work was being undertaken in the Armstrong Whitworth Design Office, and the company wished not only to maintain a design team, but also to test its capabilities under its new head. Late in 1917, the firm decided to design a single-seat fighter powered by the 230 horsepower Bentley BR2 engine to meet the Air Board specification A1. The basic design work was completed in November 1917, and on 11th December the mock-up was inspected by Lieutenant S.R. Proctor and Lieutenant Spencer of the Airborne Technical Department. At that time, the design was known as the Armstrong Whitworth FM4. The official report on the inspection expressed misgivings about the very poor forward view from the cockpit and about the unsatisfactory chord-gap ratio. On the 13th of December, Captain R.H. Mayo augmented Proctor's and Spencer's report, opining that the design was not promising from the fighting point of view. Mayo also expressed concern about the very bad view from the cockpit, and regarded the FM4 as not anything like so promising as any of the other A1A machines, now building for the BR2, and Armstrong Whitworth's would be a long way behind the others in delivery. I have stopped any gun gear, etc. from being sent up there pending your decision as to recommending a license. Despite Mayo's wholly justified misgivings, official license number 18 was issued to Armstrong Whitworth on the 7th of January, 1918, permitting them to construct, at their own risk and expense, 2 aircraft solely because the firm wished to take up designing work again, and to check the capabilities of their designing staff. The serial numbers X19 and X20 were allotted to the 2 prototypes, and the name Armadillo was registered for the design on 22nd of February, 1918. The manufacturers obviously regarded the FM4 as very much an experimental aircraft, for they intended to make 5 different sets of wings for the 2 prototypes. Doubt still remained about the fuselage design, for the top longerons were not continuous from front to rear, and there was a break at the cockpit to enable the sides to be cut down low, as a means of giving the pilot some kind of view for landing. The new spars and compression struts had been built into the X-19 wings by the 4th of March, 1918, and on 20th of March, the aircraft was declared to be satisfactory for experimental flying. Its BR-2 engine had been delivered on 18th of March and installed on the 24th. 2 days later, a further official inspection report recorded the view that the engine mounting did not appear to be a very good job, and that cooling was not satisfactory. This opinion was obviously inspired by the unusually small frontal aperture of the engine cowling, and the inspecting officer was clearly alarmed by the fact that the firm were considering the use of a fairly large spinner. It was also noted that there was no provision for cooling the enclosed Vickers guns. On the 25th of March, 1918, Armstrong Whitworth sought permission for the Armadillo to make its first flight at Cramlington, as it was felt that there was an insufficient space available at Gosforth. On the 8th of May, the Armadillo was flown by Captain A.D. Allen, RAF, who declared it to be most unsatisfactory. He found that the gear ratio of the aileron controls was too large. At high speeds, the lateral movement of the stick could only be made with the greatest difficulty. With engine full on, the aircraft flew left wing down, and the heavy lateral control made it nearly impossible to keep the left wing up. The stick was too far forward and too high. It therefore fouled the dashboard when fully forward, a fault that added materially to the hazard of flying the Armadillo, for it was very tail-heavy, and its marked tendency to climb from level flight could only be counteracted by keeping the stick forward. Inevitably, Captain Allen recorded that the visibility for landing was very bad. He concluded his report by suggesting to the firm that it would be a good thing to get the machine right for their own data, but not to send it to Martlesham, as it would be detrimental to the firm's good name if it were to be seen and criticized by a number of people. Thus, the Armadillo never went to Martlesham Heath, and the performance figures must be treated with considerable reserve. X-19 was not immediately abandoned. It made 2 flights on the 7th of June, 1918, piloted by Clifford Prodger. Thereafter, the record is mute, and it seems that the X-20 was never completed. The Armstrong Whitworth Ara. One of the many aircraft designed to exploit the promising ABC Dragonfly radial engine was the Armstrong Whitworth Ara. Like its predecessor, the Armadillo, it was a 2-bay biplane with wings of unequal chord, but it had a conventional center section in the upper wing, which was raised above the fuselage to be level with the pilot's eyes. An unusual feature of the aircraft was its remarkably small ailerons. The 2 Vickers guns were mounted low down inside the cockpit, firing between the lowest pair of engine cylinders on each side. The fuselage had a good aerodynamic entry. There was a pointed spinner that blended cleanly with the forward fuselage contours. The tail unit was similar to that of the Armadillo. 3 prototypes were ordered. By the end of June 1918, the fuselage of the first was almost complete. The tail unit was ready for covering, and the wings and undercarriage were well balanced. Unfortunately for the Ara and its contemporaries, the Dragonfly engine had by this time begun to display symptoms of the incurable troubles that lay ahead. By the end of September 1918, only 10 engines had been produced. Of the 3 Aras that had been ordered, the first was complete, but had been assembled with a mock-up engine. The skeleton of the second had been assembled, and the third was nearing the same state. In October, it was decided that the Dragonfly-powered fighters Snark, Snapper, Siskin, and Ara would not go into production, but that 1 prototype of each might be completed for trials when the engines became available. This decision was later extended to the Basilisk. Each firm was given 1 Dragonfly engine in December 1918. The Ara's performance was excellent, but its flying must have been marred by the Dragonfly's unreliability. Owing to the complete failure of the engine, no comparative evaluation of the Dragonfly-powered fighters was made. Some brief development of the Ara was undertaken, however. The second prototype was completed. It had increased gap, the lower wing passing under the fuselage as on the Bristol fighter. At a later stage, the first prototype had the balance area of the rudder reduced. Late in 1919, the Armstrong Whitworth Company closed its aircraft department and all development ceased.